Full disclaimer before we get started. Yeah, this is going to be the final Magical Girl podcast for September because honestly, though, I want to do something in October for you guys for Halloween this year. And considering that I personally feel like it's only fitting to do something for the Halloween spirit, along with my birthday live stream, hopefully I can do that, and as well as, say, my favorite Nickelodeon show, I figured I might as well give you guys your last Magical Girl podcast for September, and I won't go back to them until November. Now, with that said, on with the Magical Girl podcast video. Hello, everybody, it's I, Flamingo Writer here, back again for another Magical Girl podcast video. And what better way to talk about Magical Girl shows than to talk about one that's always been an icon for so many years? In this case, in a lot of ways, though, Sailor Moon means a lot to me, as well as some other Magical Girl fans out there, though. While you can make the argument that it's one of, if not the most iconic Magical Girl show out there, it's one that you can't automatically deny that its impact on it, though. Love it or hate it, the whole thing about Magical Girl shows with the Sailor Moon and trends really became more as time goes on, though. But even if I love Sailor Moon in spite of all that, though, there is one thing that really does irk me, and it's a problem that I need to get off my chest while I still can. I cannot stand it when people say that Sailor Moon is being ripped off so many times by other Magical Girl shows. And this is a statement that I mean, because if there was a rip-off Sailor Moon, no, I would have known about it. But to be honest, I can't understand why. I mean, hell, if you're gonna say that Sailor Moon has been ripped off, though, then I would prefer her saying that the Saban Entertainment series try to make their own Sailor Moon series in of itself, though. And that of itself has already been a rip-off since Saban Entertainment wanted to get it off the ground, and we didn't even know it was lost in media until someone already found it until then, though. But if that's not enough for you, I have a few examples to tell you if that's going to be your only exposure to say Sailor Moon's been ripped off, though. Let me give you some other examples, then. That'll be like me saying that both that Spider-Man has been ripped off of Superman just because they're both superheroes. Okay, not enough for you? Well, why not say that Star Trek and Star Wars are both exactly the same thing, and Star Wars ripped off Star Trek, even though the two have almost little to nothing in common besides their world building. The only things I can think of is that even as a Trekkie, I can tell you right now that Star Trek is basically a series where they're trying to journey to seek out new life, and Star Wars, even if I'm not a fan of it, I already know that it's a space opera. Or let's go on for one more example. Let's just say that there's also Power Rangers and Kamen Riders are both the same thing just because they're both Super Sentai series. You get what I'm saying? What I'm saying is that if you're gonna say that a lot of stuff are being ripped off to one another, then it's pretty petty to say that, considering that either A, they haven't really seen the series and they're just assuming that, or B, they're not doing their research and they're just assuming that because, hey, they're clearly being ripped off and that's what gives them their own identity. But let's try and dial back the tangents and just go on with the series itself, though. So let's talk about Sailor Moon for a little bit before we get into the actual subject. As I stated before, though, Sailor Moon is one of those iconic Magical Girl shows that went on to bring a legacy to the table. And what's more, though, they actually did to do shows that I've already did to cover my Magical Girl podcast that had a creative team. Yeah, the Sailor Moon had a very creative team, and you can definitely tell that they had a lot of other shows that had a lot of writers going on to work their own things. I've talked about two so far, but your series we're going to be talking about today happens to be its third one. But those two being Princess Tutu and Revolutionary Girl Utena, both of which are both still beloved even to this day. Well, if you've actually seen them, but still. And honestly, I can't help but wonder, why do people not say anything about those two shows since they do have their same creators and and yet they don't do anything about anything else around Sailor Moon? There's the subject for today, Wedding Peach. No, it has nothing to do with Mario, although admittedly that is kind of funny. Hindsight. It was actually a manga written by Hihiro Tomito and illustrated by Naoya Yazawa. I haven't read the manga, but it was published by Chow Magazine, the same people responsible for a lot of shoujo manga that I have no time to go over by. But one thing I will say, though, in its expanse, it does have almost this team that's written for Sailor Moon anime, and you can kind of tell why that is. But the anime itself, though, actually lasted for quite a decent amount, though, anyways, despite how underrated it is, though. That being 51 episodes, and plus 4 OVA called Wedding Peach DX. But considering I've only watched the anime as of now, that's what we're going to be talking about today. So let's grab our wedding bells and ring a ling ding to them as we dive into Wedding. The series itself focuses around three middle school girls, Momoko, Yuri, and Hinajiko. Three girls who happen to be part of a newspaper club, all with them having one thing in common. Yeah, before you watch the series, I thought at first, like a lot of people, that these girls were all the same, but thankfully they're not. Anyways, they all have a crush on one such kid, though, that being the senior student, Najiba, who happens to be very popular on the soccer team, though. And fittingly enough, though, since they are newspaper girls, though, they really all go crazy on this here guy. Way to the point where they start bickering, though. However, all three girls are assigned to become wedding angels, or love angels, as this fan sub would say, though. And as you can tell, though, it's only up to these three, along with another one later on, who we'll get to in a bit, though, are really supposed to do whatever they can in order to save the world. It's called the angel world. The angel world for the love angels themselves are basically what you expect. Basically, stop them, the devils, from coming over and taking over with hatred and everything, along with whatever evil comes around that. Pulled by their goddess, Aphrodite, and from their a beautiful man known as Limwene. Limone, I think. Yeah, I'm not good with Italian, despite being quarter of Italian, can you tell? Anyways, though, after that, however, though, they do whatever they can in order to protect these humans from the devils and defeat Reign Devila. No matter what happens, though, the girls are willing and determined to do whatever it takes in order to stop evil devils from taking over both the angel world and the. Now, I must say, for a series like this, it does seem like you kind of get the same vibes of that. But I know what you're thinking. Where does this here series come off as a Sailor Moon rip off of anything to judge by? Honestly, I won't get to that until in the end of the video. But I will say, though, for the video itself that did go more in depth with this, I'll leave more of a link in the description. Though, but I'll leave that at the end, though, just to tell more about it. But honestly, what really differentiates this series to something like Sailor Moon is that instead of something like, say, they're gonna save the galaxy, which is something Sailor Moon has done, this one was more focused on a wedding theme. And honestly, if you've seen a lot of magical girls like I have, you've noticed that they always have a certain theme to go with whatever they have, though. For a wedding theme like this, it does seem like they're doing so already, though. But let's talk about the character. First, there's Momoko. I guess in personality-wise, she does seem like somewhat of a copy of Usagi. You know the kind. Ditzy, clumsy, a little bit of an airhead at times, but never has her heart in the wrong place. And honestly, when we get right down to it, though, she actually does kind of remind me of Usagi's personality in some ways, which probably explains why they say that's a rip-off Sailor Moon, but that's far from it, though. Hell, at one point, though, her and a character by the name of Yosuke do have the tendency to be somewhat of a Mamoru and as well as Usagi, though. And it does show by just how they do so already. Like, at the beginning of the series, you can totally tell that while Yosuke likes Momoko, although Momoko is called Momopi at times, though, is really only one time where you actually do get to see these two bickering with each other. But later on in the series, as time goes on, no, they slowly build up as a relationship goes on. See, Star Giant, if you want to make a relationship go as well as you can, then this is how you do it. Slowly build them up into whatever they have, though. Sure, they have their moments, but deep down you can tell they do care for each other as time goes on, but it does take a while to get going. So if you ever do plan on watching the series, I thought I'd let you in on that. Next up, there's Yuri. And honestly, I have to say, I do love this character's personality, though. Like, first glance, I thought she was going to be like another Umi Ryazaki from Magic Knight Rayearth, but no, she actually is a lot more politer, a lot more of someone who cares, and a lot of someone who really does show her genuine side. Yeah, like the other girls, she does have a crush on the your student though, who's captain of the soccer team though. But later on though, she does show her willing to go as far as she can though to help save the devils. Well, no, not save the devils, save the angels from this whole thing though. And what's more, you get to see her have a genuine side to her though, and she's really willing to do whatever she can though. And finally, we have is Hinjiku, who's actually the tomboy of the group, though. And while I admit that she does act all brash and everything, though, she does have her moments where she'll show that she's a lot much nicer than you think she is, though. But later on in the series, though, we do get to meet with our fourth is Scarlet. Now, unlike a lot of the characters I've talked about, though, in this year's series, Scarlet actually has a lot more backstory of why she acts the way she does. She doesn't come until episode 35, if anyone's curious, if everyone wants to watch this series, though. But later on, though, we actually do get to see that Scarlet is not all of what she seems to be, though. See, at first glance, she does act like what you expect, though. Kind of like Karen in Mermaid Melody, she does act cold towards our heroines, but later on, though, she does warm up to them, though. At first glance, though, she acts like she wants to kill those devils, and she has a reason why she has a grudge against devils at the first time she appears, though. But it doesn't come until a few episodes in when she gets more screen time, though. We do get to see why she doesn't like devils. See, it turns out that her friend, who's like a little sister character, Frasier, actually got killed right in front of her very eyes when and Scarlet was just trying to stop her from doing so by killing the devils, though, which Scarlet to this day is pretty bitter towards. Anyways, though, but after getting some confession from Momoko in her wedding peach form, though, she does warm up to them, though, and sometimes join them, though. Now, at first glance, I would say that's a bit bitchy towards that, but in Scarlet's position, I can understand why she would do so already, though. I mean, think about it. Wouldn't you be upset as if someone killed your friend or anyone you were close to right there in front of you? It's actually pretty scary to see that, though, and thus you can see Scarlet was still willing to go out of her way to do it, but after confessing to team up with the girls, even if she does take time, though, you can definitely see that in its own expanse, though. But as time goes on, as the series goes on and on about that, though, you might be asking yourself, though, what are the goals for this here characters to do, though? Well, honestly, the first thing that comes into mind, though, would have to be they have to get to the Saint something fours. Are basically the four pieces of jewelry that the girls have to retrieve back before Ring Devila gets a hold of them, though. Those being a ring, a necklace, a tiara, and a pair of earrings. All of the girls get each their own set, though, but honestly, that's how they also get hold of new weapons as time goes on, though. Well, if you want to call them weapons anyways, though, because I hear a lot of people say they're not weapons, but yet they still use them to fight back. Why not just call them gnats? I call them more weapons than sticks, but hey, I think these here actually do make whatever. While it does take the girls to get going when it comes to talking about Aphrodite, though, it actually does show that she really does wish the angels a lot of good luck to get the Sing for some things. And what's more, the other assignment is to beat, as I stated before, Rain Devila. And honestly, though, when it comes to Aphrodite, I gotta say, they really animated her beautifully here, though. But it's Lin Wei himself, though, he was actually the one that was sent down to Earth, though, to tell the angels, more specifically the girls, to go ahead and stop these here devils on though, but he was also a secret agent in disguise though when it comes to being in the school though. I'm not gonna spoil who it was that was Lin Wei in disguise though, but I'll say though the series itself does bring a lot of twists here and there though. Not as much as say something like the previous series Kami-chan Karen, but at least they answer them as time goes on though. But I will say, I mean, I don't know if it's just me, but this is kind of hot for me. Oh man, I shouldn't really be saying that, should I? But I want to talk about another character in particular. In this case, though, their mascot character, Jama P. You know how some mascot characters usually start off as good for their heroes to come forward and anything? No, just well, Jama P is a little different than that. See, in case you don't know, if you haven't seen this here series yet, though, Jama P started off as a devil, and what he did was possess any human, in this case a normal human, so he can get them to do such devious things, whether it's for hate or for something stronger than that, though. And honestly, though, it's pretty clear that while he does act like that, though, later after Momoko spreads some love and kindness to the guy, though, Jama P starts acting more like, well, a cute, cuddly creature, though, and he gets called a traitor ever since he betrayed the devils and everything, no. Now, I will say for Jama P, I will admit, though, he's freaking adorable when it comes to being a mascot. I know, mascots are nothing new for being adorable in magical girl shows, but come on now. Look at this guy. Doesn't he remind me of a Squishmallow before the Squishmallows were invented? Although, admittedly, they finally made toys out of him when the show was going off, though, so kudos for that, though. But I have to say, out of all the mascots I can think of at the top of my head, I think this one may be the more underrated one out there, right up there with Shi-chan from Kami-chan Karen. But before we get into the actual in of herself, though, I need to at least discuss a few things. Now, you're probably asking, though, why haven't I talked about the English dub? After all, though, this is one of those magical girl shows that actually did come to the West to get an English dub. Well, there's a problem with that. See, I wanted to watch the dub for myself. Actually, I did see online, though, but I'm not gonna lie, it's not for me. It's not the worst dub out there. It's not on some level of Sailor Moon where they cut things out, though, but well, you know how some English names out there, especially when it comes to the actors, they just name their names inconsistently? Yeah, Wedding Peach is kind of a victim of that, where the actors are basically naming the characters inconsistently with their Japanese names. I hate to be too mad at that, because honestly, though, it happens to me a lot of times, but at least I try to stay consistent as I can, though. Here, though, you might as well just say that I only watched the subtitles so I can at least get a better understanding what their names were, and basically work with that, though. So that's why. They did have it in other countries like Germany or Italy, which is where this here series got more popularity, but I'm not gonna mince words, though. I prefer the sub at this case, though. The whole English dub in itself, though, when looking it up, I'm not gonna mince words, though. A lot of the time when I started looking at the names to see if any of them sound familiar, only a few of them sound like they ring a bell, and not a lot of them I've known from other places. Or maybe I have heard their names someplace, I just didn't know whereabouts they came from. I'm not going to look through Wikipedia all the time just for doing that, so if you want to listen to the English dub yourself, go right ahead. But I'm just saying I personally prefer the sub, though, at least for myself, though. But okay, the sub and dub themselves are not perfect with each other. But let's talk about the devils themselves. The first devil that appears in the first part of the series, although it's really the couple of episodes for the first arc, would have to be Pluie. Now, admittedly, I thought he was the main antagonist for the entire series, because for the first couple of episodes of the series, up there with Momoko, it takes a while for it to get going. But when I first saw Pluie, I gotta admit, he's actually pretty cool as a devil, though. Yeah, he spread his hatred around, though, but that's only because he won and the girls to actually end the hatred, though, and what's more, just go with what they have, though. But considering that he got in love from Momoko's heart, though, he still gets sucked into the World of Darkness. Yeah, the World of Darkness, for those who are curious, though, is basically a black hole where devils usually go if they don't obey what they do for their mistress and bring Devila, so they can do so already, though. Are there any other devils One other devil that I actually did end up liking was this guy in Ingenious. And honestly, despite looking like he could be a male version of one of the Sailor Moon villains, he's actually got a cool power I wish I could see more into other Magical Girl media. Or maybe I have overlooked them though. See, this guy can clearly possess a body though, and honestly, the body he chooses to is Takaru. Oh, and honestly, if you haven't guessed by now, yeah, he may all look all nerdy, but the truth is, though, he does have his own cocky ways of his intelligence, but it's actually proven that he's actually more sensitive than that, though. Hell, he's honestly a close friend, or in this case, childhood friend of Najiku's, and it's also pretty nice to see him get more developed as time goes on, though. I'm not going to spoil too much of how these girls end up with their love interests, though, but later on in the series, we do get to see how Rain Devila uses her purposes, though. Speaking of Rain Devila, though, I think it's only fitting if we talk about her, so let's get into our main bad guy of the evening, Rain Devila. Despite being the main antagonist of the series, and before you think all Queen Beryl vibes, though, no, she actually proves herself to be a lot more cunning than you may expect, though. See, it turns out that she is the leader of the Devils, and not just the Queen of the Devils either, but she also seems to have pretty much ruled a lot of the cases where she plans to get rid of love once and for all, though. This is mostly because Aphrodite he fell in love with someone that she thought she would fall in love with, though. But afterwards, though, she's begin jealousy and hatred altogether, though, just to prove that, though. Rain Devila herself, though, I'm just gonna say this right here and now. By the time I'm making this recording, I did not know this, though, but did you know in the manga she didn't really have a backstory to her character of why she became the way she is, but the anime decided to put backstory on there, though? I think it's more divisive of what you may think when it comes to. And I say divisive because if you know anything about Magical Girl shows, or in this case, villains in this territory, though, then I'm not so sure how many people would truly love that, though, in itself, though. Like, it really depends on if you want the backstory for the character, or if you want no backstory at all, though. Personally, I'm one or the other when it comes to backstories. On some level, I can see why villains could get a backstory if they want to get more grip on why they hate the heroes, but on the other hand, I can see why you want more of a mysterious vibe to it, though. One of my friends actually says that he doesn't really think that they need a backstory or anything like that, though, but honestly, I don't really think that's always the case, though. As long as there's a little more build-up into why they act the way they do, or something like that, or maybe if you want to give more mysterious vibe, then I'd say go for it, though. Chances are it would have been like that, though. But let's talk about the technical aspects as well, though. In this case, let's talk about the animation. I didn't know this before now, but while I admit that it does have some sort of vibe with that, though, did you know that this was animated by OLL? Well, OLM, for those who don't know the name of it, though, have already seen one of their works already, Pokemon. And you can kind of tell just by looking at the character models here, though. Granted, they're a lot more from, I would say, KSS, though, but that's only because they only collab with them anyways, though. So it's easy to see why you could get that, though. As for the animation, it does really feel like a 90s anime, though. The hand-drawn animation, the characters being more than how they look, though. And honestly, it doesn't look all that bad, but all things considered, though. It's easy to get accustomed to it anyways, though. But then you start hearing about the music. I already talked about the voice acting, so there's no use to going that, but the music here is actually pretty great by all things considered, though. It really does feel like a wedding vibe to it, and they really know how to put it their all when it comes to that, though. The first season's music is more like, say, a feel of saying you're getting a feel good, though, but after you start watching the series, they're not afraid to go dark when they want to, though. And honestly, while it's not as dark as some other series I can mention, it's still dark enough to get things intense later on, though. But speaking of intense, though, when it comes to Yosuke's character, I would talk more about him, but I want you guys to watch this series for yourself, because you're going to find something out that you're probably not expecting. At least for me. But I started watching Winning Peach, and there was a few reasons why I decided to watch this series in time with all that. See, I've mentioned her before on my channel. I have a friend named Miss Shia, and I did promise her I wanted to cover Winning Peach on my Magical Girl podcast video. It took a long time, but it finally did. But you're probably asking, why did it take so long? And I can trace it back to this has to do with myself personally, because honestly, when you get right down to it, though, the problem I have with myself is that I keep finding more magical girl shows as time goes on, though. By the time I'm making this recording, while I have seen all of Wedding Peach's anime, I still have yet to see Wedding Peach DX, and I don't think there's ever any time to actually do something like say, what do I think of the OVAs, because that's not what this video is there for, though. I wanted to watch Wedding Peach for myself, considering I've heard that it's a must-watch, and what's more, it's a underrated gem for a Magical Girl series. And if you are a Magical Girl fan, you probably would get into it as much as I could have, or maybe even more than that, though. But the problem I see here has to do with how many people are saying it's a ripoff of his. And speaking of which, though, I can't really go without mentioning this in the video, but I think it's only fitting if we talk about discussing one of the elephants in the room. Why are the people saying this is a Magical Girl ripoff of Sailor Moon when there are plenty of others that did Magical Girl shows before then and afterwards? I can come up with one explanation probably why is that. It's probably because a lot of people are saying that Sailor Moon, despite its popularity, have a lot of Magical Girl shows that but as I stated before, though, Magical Girl shows have come a long way since then, no. If you really don't believe Wedding Peach doesn't belong in the classic category, well, either you're just thinking that every Magical Girl show is a Sailor Moon ripoff, or you just haven't seen some prior to that, though. There are plenty of Magical Girl shows that you can argue are ripoffs here and there, though. But to my expanse of that, though, you either are just assuming that without doing any research, or you're just assuming that because honestly there are no other Magical Girl shows out there for your extent to find that anyways, though. Wedding Peach is a series that, even if you aren't into Magical Girl shows, though, I really can't force anyone to watch it anyways because I'm not here to do that. This podcast is made for anyone who's into Magical Girl shows or trying to find some that they can put in their. But I think the only reason why so many think that way is because almost nobody saw Wedding Peach. It did okay, but nowhere near as classic and iconic as, let's say, the series Sailor Moon did, but it's classic enough to actually give a recommendation. And hell, if you're someone like me who's into Magical Girl shows and wants to see a more brand of what they do for the Magical Girl formula, but of course, you can watch Wedding Peach at your own leisure. I recommend watching the sub if you want more consistency with its storytelling and the names of these characters, but I get why some people would prefer the dub if they want to have that instead of just watching a show where they have to read subtitles, though. I know that can get annoying for some people, but still, that's really one thing I will say about Wedding Peach, though. But over time, it became a cult classic for what it's worth, though. I started watching and binging through this series since last week, and while I admit that behind the scenes I usually just tell some friends mine what I'm getting at the Magical Girl show, though, I still think Wedding Peach is well worth the show if you want to see more look in that, though. But even with that said, though, my video can't really do it justice. If you want a more incomprehensive look on this here series for yourself, though, I recommend watching He goes a show about this retrospective, though. She goes a lot more in depth with this series than I could have, and I can only wish I was more in depth with this series than she could have in a lot of ways, though. Trust me, I'll leave a link in the description if you want more in depth look on Wedding Peach in itself, though. But I'll leave you with this answer. Thing is, though, while I personally don't think Wedding Peach is a ripoff of Sailor Moon, it was definitely unfairly ignored. And honestly, I can still say you can clearly watch it in your own leisure. It's definitely an underrated gem that still needs to be watched, though, if you want to see a Magical Girl series, though. But other than that, I don't really have that much to say without giving away ideas about the series in itself, though. And hey, if you are into something that gives you a lot more vibe of Sailor Moon, then you can give Wedding Peach a watch for yourself. Come back next time, and while I am taking a break from the Magical Girl podcast, we're going to be talking about something Halloween related. But until then, thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you all next time. And as always, stay flamingotastic. See ya!